Think for a moment. Imagine waking up one day and realizing that the things that once energized you no longer have the same effect. Activities that used to excite you now feel strangely distant. Conversations seem repetitive. Goals you chased for years suddenly feel hollow, almost artificial. At first, this experience can be deeply unsettling. You may wonder if something is wrong with you, if you're becoming lazy, depressed, or disconnected from life itself. But what if this loss of interest is not a collapse, but a message? What if it is not a sign of decline, but a signal that a deeper psychological transformation has begun? Today, we are going to explore a powerful and often misunderstood idea inspired by the work of Carl Jung. An idea that touches the core of human development, meaning, and inner awakening. We will examine why losing interest in everything can be one of the most important signs of inner change you will ever experience. And stay with me until the very end of this journey, because the final realization will be the most important and transformative of all, capable of reshaping how you understand your life, your struggles, and your sense of purpose. If reflections like these speak to you, take a moment now to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, share this video with someone who may be experiencing the same inner confusion, and write a comment about what you have been feeling lately. What we are about to uncover may profoundly change the way you see your emotions and your inner world. Carl Jung believed that the human psyche is alive, dynamic, and constantly seeking balance. It is not satisfied with stagnation. When we remain psychologically stuck in outdated roles, values, or identities, the psyche does not remain silent. Instead, it withdraws energy from the external world. Jung called this psychic energy libido, not merely in a sexual sense, but as the vital force that animates interest, curiosity, and motivation. When this energy retreats, the world appears dull, flat, and meaningless. From a Jungian perspective, losing interest in everything often signals that the conscious life is no longer aligned with the deeper needs of the unconscious. The goals you pursue may no longer reflect who you are becoming. The ambitions you once embraced may belong to an earlier version of yourself. When this happens, the psyche demands change, not through logic, but through feeling. Boredom, apathy, and emotional numbness become the language of the unconscious. Modern society teaches us to fear these states. We are told that constant motivation is normal and that losing passion means something must be fixed immediately. But Jung saw this moment not as a pathology, but as a turning point. He observed that many individuals who entered this phase were standing at the threshold of individuation, the lifelong process of becoming a whole and authentic self. Have you ever noticed how external success does not always bring inner fulfillment? How achievements sometimes leave a strange emptiness behind? Jung explained this through the concept of the persona, the social mask we wear to function in the world. When we over-identify with this mask, living only according to expectations, roles, and social validation, the deeper self becomes neglected. Eventually, the unconscious responds by draining meaning from those external pursuits. This is why losing interest can feel so disorienting. The structures that once gave your life direction begin to collapse. You may feel lost, uncertain, or even frightened by the absence of desire. Yet this emptiness is not random. It is purposeful. It creates space. Space for reflection, for confrontation with the inner world, and for the emergence of values that are not borrowed from society, but discovered within. Philosophers across history have recognized this pattern. Friedrich Nietzsche spoke of the collapse of old values as a necessary stage before the creation of new ones. Viktor Frankl observed that a crisis of meaning often precedes a deeper understanding of purpose. Even ancient spiritual traditions described periods of inner dryness as precursors to awakening. What unites these perspectives is the recognition that discomfort can be transformative. Ask yourself honestly, what have you lost interest in recently? Is it work, relationships, ambitions, or distractions that once defined your days? And more importantly, what does that loss reveal about your inner growth? Could it be that your psyche is urging you to stop living automatically and start living consciously? Do not rush to escape this state. Jung warned that resisting inner withdrawal only intensifies suffering. When we distract ourselves excessively, forcing enthusiasm where none exists, we silence the unconscious rather than listening to it. True growth begins when we allow ourselves to feel the emptiness without immediately trying to fill it. As you reflect on these ideas, consider this question. What if your loss of interest is not a failure of motivation, but a call to transformation? What if it is inviting you to descend inward so that something more authentic can emerge? This is only the first step. In the next part, we will explore how this loss of interest manifests emotionally and psychologically, why it often coincides with anxiety or sadness, and how understanding this process can prevent unnecessary suffering. For now, sit with this thought and observe your inner experience with curiosity rather than judgment. If you approve this part, tell me too, when interest in the outer world begins to fade, it rarely happens in isolation. It is usually accompanied by a complex emotional landscape that can feel confusing and overwhelming. Anxiety may arise without a clear cause. Sadness can appear even when nothing visibly wrong is happening. A subtle sense of restlessness may coexist with a strange lack of desire to act. Carl Jung understood these emotional states not as random disturbances, but as signals that the psyche is reorganizing itself at a deeper level. Jung observed that when psychic energy withdraws from external objects, it does not disappear. It turns inward. This inward movement forces a confrontation with thoughts, memories, and emotions that were previously ignored or suppressed. This is why losing interest in everything can feel so uncomfortable. Without the usual distractions, you're left alone with yourself, and for many people, this is precisely what they have spent years avoiding. You may notice old questions resurfacing, questions about who you truly are beyond your job, your relationships, or your achievements. Questions about whether the life you are living genuinely reflects your inner values. Jung believed that these questions emerge when the unconscious is seeking integration. The psyche is no longer satisfied with surface-level meaning. It demands depth. Psychologically, this phase often resembles what Jung called a confrontation with the shadow. The shadow represents the parts of ourselves we have rejected, denied, or never fully developed. When interest in the outer world fades, the shadow has more space to emerge. This can manifest as irritability, self-doubt, regret, or a heightened awareness of personal flaws. But this confrontation is not meant to punish you. It is meant to make you whole. Many people mistake this phase for depression alone. While there can be overlap, Jung made an important distinction. Depression that arises from this inner shift often carries a symbolic purpose. It slows you down. It forces reflection. It interrupts compulsive action. In this sense, it can be understood as a psychological pause, a necessary stillness before transformation. Think about how nature works. Before a seed sprouts, it must first be buried in darkness. Before a butterfly emerges, it must dissolve inside the cocoon. Jung frequently used such symbols to explain inner development. Losing interest in everything is often the cocoon stage. From the outside, it looks like stagnation. From the inside, profound change is taking place. The danger arises when this state is misunderstood or resisted. Modern culture encourages constant productivity, positivity, and outward success. When someone feels empty or unmotivated, they are often pressured to fix it immediately, to push through, to stay busy. Jung warned that this attitude can prolong suffering. When the psyche calls for inward attention and is ignored, symptoms often intensify. Have you noticed how forcing enthusiasm rarely works? How pretending to care can leave you feeling even more exhausted? This is because psychic energy cannot be commanded by will alone. It must be understood and respected. Jung believed that listening to inner signals, even uncomfortable ones, is essential for psychological health. At this stage, the most important task is not to regain interest quickly, but to ask deeper questions. What no longer feels authentic in my life? What roles am I playing that feel empty? What desires feel imposed rather than chosen? These questions do not have immediate answers. They unfold over time, through reflection, dreams, and honest self-observation. Other thinkers echo this view. Existential philosophers emphasize that meaning cannot be inherited or imposed. It must be discovered through personal confrontation with uncertainty. Viktor Frankl observed that when old meanings collapse, a vacuum appears, but that vacuum also creates the possibility for a more conscious and responsible sense of purpose. Emotionally, this phase can feel lonely. You may feel disconnected from people who seem content with routines that no longer satisfy you. Jung saw this as a natural part of individuation. As you change inwardly, external relationships and environments may temporarily feel out of sync. This does not mean you are becoming cold or detached. It means your inner compass is recalibrating. Ask yourself honestly, are you afraid of this emptiness, or are you afraid of what it might reveal? What would happen if you stopped running from the feeling and started listening to it? What truths might surface if you allowed yourself to sit with the discomfort? This inward turn is not meant to last forever. It is a phase, but a crucial one. In the next part, we will explore how to navigate this period consciously, how to avoid common traps, and how to recognize the signs that new meaning is beginning to emerge. We will also address why this process, when understood, can become one of the most empowering experiences of your life. There comes a moment in this inner descent when a crucial choice appears, often without being noticed. You can either numb the discomfort and rush back to familiar patterns, or you can remain present and allow the process to unfold. Carl Jung believed that this choice determines whether the loss of interest becomes a period of silent suffering or a gateway to profound inner growth. The psyche does not ask for blind endurance, but for conscious participation. To navigate this phase, Jung emphasized the importance of attention. Not forced optimism, not frantic productivity, but attentive awareness. When external interests fade, the inner world becomes more vivid. Dreams may become more intense. Memories you thought were resolved may resurface. Emotional reactions may feel stronger or more confusing. Jung saw these phenomena as communications from the unconscious, attempting to restore balance and meaning. One of the most common traps during this period is self-judgment. Many people interpret their loss of interest as personal failure. They compare themselves to others who seem motivated and fulfilled and conclude that something is wrong with them. Jung warned that comparison at this stage is particularly destructive. Individuation is not a collective process. It unfolds uniquely in each person, according to their inner necessities, not social timelines. Another trap is over-identification with the feeling of emptiness itself. While this state has meaning, Jung cautioned against turning it into an identity. You are not your apathy. You are not your confusion. These are temporary states, not permanent definitions. The task is to remain in dialogue with them, not to surrender to them completely. Jung often spoke about the importance of symbols during times of inner transformation. When rational explanations fail, symbols bridge the gap between conscious understanding and unconscious truth. This is why art, mythology, writing, and contemplation become especially powerful during periods of withdrawal. They allow expression without forcing premature clarity. They give form to what is still becoming. Historically, many great thinkers and creators experienced long periods of apparent stagnation before major breakthroughs. Philosophers, artists, and scientists alike described phases where nothing seemed meaningful, where old frameworks collapsed and new ones had not yet formed. Jung saw this not as coincidence, but as a psychological law. Creation requires dissolution. Emotionally, this stage can fluctuate. Some days you may feel calm, even relieved to step back from external pressures. Other days you may feel anxious, as if you are drifting without direction. Jung encouraged patience with this oscillation. The psyche moves in rhythms, not straight lines. Trying to stabilize the experience too quickly can interrupt its natural development. A key insight Jung offered is that meaning cannot be forced, but it can be prepared for. By creating inner space, by tolerating uncertainty, you allow new values to emerge organically. These values are not chosen because they are impressive or socially rewarded, but because they feel alive. When this happens, interest returns, not as obsession or compulsion, but as quiet commitment. Ask yourself this: if you stripped away expectations, applause, and fear of judgment, what would still matter to you? What activities or ideas evoke a subtle sense of rightness, even if they do not excite you yet? Jung believed that these subtle signals are more trustworthy than intense but fleeting passions. Psychologically, this is the transition from a life driven by adaptation to a life guided by authenticity. Early in life, adaptation is necessary. We learn how to function, belong, and survive, but there comes a point when adaptation alone is not enough. The psyche demands individuation. Losing interest in externally imposed goals is often the first sign that this demand has become urgent. This process can also change how you relate to others. You may find superficial conversations draining. You may crave depth, honesty, and silence more than stimulation. Jung did not see this as withdrawal from humanity, but as refinement of connection. As you become more aligned with yourself, you become more selective about where you invest your energy. Consider this carefully. What if this phase is teaching you discernment rather than detachment? What if it is sharpening your sensitivity to what is genuine and what is not? Instead of asking when motivation will return, ask what kind of motivation you are willing to live for. We are approaching a crucial realization. In the final part, we will explore the moment when interest begins to return, why it feels different from before, and how this transformation reshapes your understanding of success, purpose, and fulfillment. The last insight will tie everything together and reveal why this experience, though uncomfortable, may be one of the most important turning points of your life. Eventually, often quietly and without dramatic announcement, something begins to change. After a long period of emptiness, confusion, or emotional stillness, a subtle form of interest returns. Not the restless excitement you once knew, not the hunger for validation or achievement, but something calmer, deeper, and more stable. Carl Jung believed this moment marks a decisive shift in psychological development. It is the point where meaning is no longer borrowed from the outside world, but arises from within. This return of interest feels different because you are different. The psyche no longer invests its energy in roles, expectations, or goals that are disconnected from your inner truth. Instead, it moves toward what feels necessary, even if it appears modest or unglamorous. Jung emphasized that true meaning rarely announces itself loudly. It often begins as a quiet sense of rightness, a feeling that something aligns with who you are becoming. At this stage, many people are surprised by what begins to matter to them. Status may lose its appeal. Approval may feel irrelevant. You may find yourself drawn to simplicity, depth, or service rather than constant stimulation. Jung saw this not as a loss of ambition, but as a refinement of values. The ego no longer dominates the psyche. It enters into dialogue with the deeper self. This is where the most important realization emerges. Losing interest in everything was never the end of your vitality. It was the withdrawal of energy from what no longer deserved it. The psyche was protecting you from a life lived out of alignment. What felt like emptiness was actually a clearing. What felt like stagnation was preparation. Jung described individuation as the courage to live one's own life, rather than the life expected by others. This courage is not loud or aggressive. It is quiet, steady, and deeply rooted. When interest returns after inner withdrawal, it carries this quality. You no longer chase meaning. You recognize it. Philosophers and psychologists across disciplines converge here. Viktor Frankl observed that meaning emerges when a person commits to something larger than ego gratification. Nietzsche spoke of the individual who creates values after old ones collapse. Jung united these insights psychologically, showing that this process unfolds naturally when the unconscious is respected rather than suppressed. You may still face uncertainty. Individuation does not eliminate doubt, but doubt no longer paralyzes you. It becomes part of a living process. You learn to trust inner signals rather than external noise. You begin to sense when something drains you and when something nourishes you, even if it challenges you. Relationships may change again at this stage, but differently than before. You no longer withdraw because of emptiness, but choose connection based on depth and authenticity. You may speak less, but with greater honesty. You may do less, but with greater presence. Jung believed that this shift marks psychological maturity. Now consider this carefully. What if the loss of interest you feared was actually your psyche refusing to settle for a life that was too small for you? What if it was the most honest response your inner world could offer? What if, instead of asking how to regain motivation, the real question was, what kind of life deserves your energy? This is the final and most powerful insight. The loss of interest in everything is not a sign that life has lost meaning. It is a sign that false meanings are falling away. It is the psyche clearing the ground so that something real can take root. When you understand this, fear gives way to respect, resistance gives way to curiosity, and confusion gives way to quiet confidence. So if you are in that place now, feeling disconnected, uninspired, or empty, do not rush to escape it. Listen, reflect, stay present. This may be the moment your life is asking you to stop living automatically and start living truthfully. And when interest returns, as it does, you will recognize it not by intensity, but by authenticity, not by noise, but by depth, not by excitement alone, but by meaning. This is not the end of something. It is the beginning of becoming who you truly are. As this understanding settles, something subtle but important happens in the way you relate to your own inner experience. You stop treating emotions as problems to be eliminated and begin to see them as messages to be interpreted. Carl Jung insisted that the psyche is always communicating, even when it appears silent. Apathy, boredom, and loss of interest are not empty states. They are symbolic states carrying meaning precisely because they interrupt the familiar flow of life. When you look back, you may realize that every major shift in your life was preceded by a period of inner discomfort. Moments when certainty dissolved, moments when the future felt unclear. Jung would say this is no accident. Psychological growth does not move forward by accumulation alone. It also moves forward through subtraction. What is no longer aligned must fall away. This is why people who pass through this phase often emerge with a different relationship to time. They are less rushed, less reactive, less desperate to prove themselves. Interest, when it returns, is no longer scattered across countless distractions. It becomes concentrated, focused, intentional. Jung believed this concentration of psychic energy is one of the clearest signs that a person is living closer to their inner center. You may also notice a shift in how you interpret suffering. Instead of asking why this is happening to me, you begin to ask what this is asking of me. This change in perspective is not naive optimism. It is psychological realism. It acknowledges pain without making it meaningless. Jung repeatedly emphasized that meaning does not remove suffering, but it makes suffering bearable. At this stage, many people feel a quiet sense of responsibility toward their own lives. Not obligation imposed from outside, but responsibility arising from self-knowledge. You become aware that ignoring your inner truth carries consequences. You understand that conformity, when it costs authenticity, eventually leads back to emptiness. This awareness is not heavy. It is clarifying. Jung warned that the greatest danger is not losing interest in everything, but losing interest in oneself. The period you have explored is precisely the opposite. It is the psyche reclaiming attention, pulling energy back home. What follows is not a return to the old life, but the emergence of a more conscious one. So when you hear the phrase, "you will start losing interest in everything," do not hear it as a prophecy of decline. Hear it as a description of a threshold, a crossing point between who you were and who you are becoming, between borrowed meaning and discovered purpose, between noise and depth. If you find yourself standing at that threshold now, remember this: you are not late, you are not broken, you are not failing at life. You are listening to a signal that many ignore for decades, and that alone already sets you on a different path. Carl Jung once wrote that the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. Sometimes the first step toward that privilege is losing interest in everything that you are not. Thanks for looking.